recording this webinar, and it will be made available later on the website. And so if you say something, I think if the chat doesn't get recorded, we just kind of get it recorded afterwards, but it won't pop up on the screen. So if you're on video, you will be on the screen if you're sharing. And so just keep that in mind. I know I don't always look my picture perfect best in the morning, so I try to be aware of it for others. So thank you for being here. Let's just get started. I am really excited to begin this outreach effort for the Climate Adaptation Plan. Just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available, and so this is not the only opportunity to engage with this. I know that Friday mornings are not always really optimal for people, and so we have the next couple outreach opportunities planned at this time, but we will be trying some evening formats and some weekend formats to really make this available. And of course, you'll be able to find it on the website and rewatch it. And then if you just shoot me an email or call me, I would love to chat with you a little bit more about the adaptation plan. There are a couple different ways that we can interact with each other today on Teams. There's the chat box option is always open. If you have a thought, just go ahead and write it in the chat, and we'll be able to see that. And if you have a question for the speakers, you can also put it in there, and we'll address that after the presentations. And then later, a big part of this is you making your voice heard in this process. And so we'll have 20 minutes or so for everyone you can raise your hand and you'll be able to speak if that is of interest to you. But then we also have the ability to just write things in the chat box. And then there's also another notes option. So we'll go through the logistics of that a little bit later in this webinar. And then I'm always available at my email, or if you leave me a voicemail at my office phone. I'm not in the office, but I do get those voicemails. And if you request that I follow up with you, I'm more than happy to do that. So today we've gone through kind of the welcomes and the housekeeping. And so I always really want to, again, make sure that we're centering the tribal community in the adaptation planning. And so I would love to have an opening word of kind of guidance from the Vice Chair Jeremy Wolf, if I am able. So I'm going to stop presenting, and I'm going to see if I can elevate a person. Gallery view, together mode, maybe that's what I want. So Jeremy, if you're able, I'd love to have you unmute. Oh, that's really weird.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, glad I was able to make it this morning. My electricity got knocked out, so I ended up having to drive somewhere where I can get a signal. So, Shoskupa, Nikmaitski, Tatsmewi. Good morning, everybody. My name is Katsil Ilpilt, or Jeremy Wolf, and it's an honor to be here this morning with you all. It's a wonderful topic to have. As we look forward, we always want to know what has occurred in the past, and just as what happened this morning, you know, this weather, this climate is something that we're always aware of, because it's a reflection upon our foods. It's a reflection upon how we conduct ourselves and our way of life. As we enter into this season, we seek to be prepared. We seek to go hunting. We seek to have our foods put away for the long winter. But I truly appreciate all the teachings that have been passed on within my family, within your family, at the Longhouse. All these things have helped us, have guided us into who we are and where we'll be, and most importantly, what we'll leave behind for those who will never see, because they'll see us, they'll see what we do, they'll see what we haven't done, and they'll have something hopefully for themselves and for their children. So I just want to thank you once again, Colleen, for putting this together. Thank you all for the lessons and the teachings, and understanding that expressing our culture, expressing our unwritten laws in a way that can be taught in a way that can be communicated and expressed in today's language of math and science is just a reflection upon how smart and how wonderful those teachings that have come over the millennia to get us to where we are today. So I'm happy to be a part of that. Happy to continue to learn. Will forever be a student of our culture and appreciate it once again. That's all.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. With this, I would ask that, again, everybody is muted and maybe we could turn our videos off to save bandwidth during this time. I plan to turn mine off during the presentation. And so I am going to, I always really like to start with stories. So the importance of stories can't be understated. And so there are a few stories that have been committed to film that I really, really love and I think are a really appropriate way to open this discussion. And so I am going to pull those up. And so we have, sorry again, order of operations, a little bit odd. I'm going to
Then creation was complete, man and woman, the yellow of the earth, the red of our blood, the red of our life, and the blue of the heavens above, our spirit. We were created in these three steps in our belief. But the Creator had already had things on this world that were here prior. So as a man stood on the east side looking to the west, and the woman stood on the west looking to the east, all creation came before them. The first to speak and give of himself, and he spoke for all the life, the water life that followed him was the salmon. As the first food, he gave and sacrificed of himself. After salmon, all the water life named of itself, all the salmonoid species, all the resident fish species, down to the shacho, the clams. The second to speak of the first foods was the deer. The deer gave of himself to be our food. He gave us his bones to become our tools. He gave his skin to become our clothing. And then he also gave to us one of the biggest gifts of his hide to make the drum. After the deer spoke, then all the animals that walked the land named themselves in order in the first foods as they went along. Elk, antelope, moose, buffalo, even down to the groundhog, which is a food as well. And they gave a promise that they can never change. And from the day of the beginning to this day, they're still the same. So then creation turned and looked to the west. And it was the woman stood. Then all the plant life and roots that we use named themselves to her. And the first to speak was the bitter root. I am Piache. I will be your food. But before anybody harvests, you've got to have that ceremony to recognize that new growth. And that was the law that was made. Then the roots, all in order, named themselves. Many, many, many roots. Luke, Chau, Sasmita, Anipash, Panko, Mammon, all kinds of different roots that some of them we don't even harvest now these days ourselves. And then the berries then spoke to the woman. And they named themselves in the order. But the one to speak was the Wiono, the huckleberry. And like any good grandmother, wanted to see all of her children go first before her. That's why she's always served at the last part, at the end. Then after all the berries named themselves in order that they give themselves, then creation all looked back to the man, to the east. And at that time is when the water spoke. In the I am water. I will be the blood of our mother, the earth. From me, you are born. Both men and women are born from water. The meal is not done until the end when you drink water and you pray again. The salmon that went and came back and never changed, never broke that promise. The animals that live in the mountains that can never change, they've never broken that promise. But when European people have come and brought us all the easy things of life, many years ago it was the gun, metal, knives, things were easy, made easier, canvas, homes, cars, airplanes, TV, internet, everything this day that makes our life easier takes us that much farther away from our first foods. We're the ones that have changed. And it's up to us now to change ourselves back, to reacquaint ourselves with that great law that can never be changed. Chi, Iwan Akushna Shtamanachen, Nami Outnin, Natkurat Miai. This is a testimony I give in relationship to our first foods, the holy, sacred foods. Audyanagusnash Ashapawachakai Shanami Mianash in Miai. And I commit this to recording for the future of my children. Kukna Chanaman Kuki Wadachna Lalakwe, that perhaps it will never be left behind. Chao Shwachi in Misinwit, because these are not my words. Pusha Shash. Because I'm only repeating and echoing the words of my elders.
So I think that's such a beautiful story, and it's a really great one to open with. It really sets the tone for the importance of what we're doing with this plan. And so I really love to start with it, and Thomas tells it really beautifully. But we also have another video that was produced back in 2012 that talks about climate change and that promise specifically. And so I would like to present this as
First foods came around at the beginning of time through creation for us. They promised themselves to us, and we promised ourselves to them. They're our way of life, so we have to protect them at any cost. Nusach Yamish, Piache, Chaush, Timish, Wiwanu.
So the first foods comes from a tribal creation belief that when the world was created and the creator asked the different animals who was going to take care of the Indian people, this is the order that they promised themselves. And that promise is remembered in the way that the foods are actually served in the community longhouse. They're served in that same order. And water is first because all life depends on water.
I'm pulling out the nets. There's 3 blueback and 1 steelhead.
So that serving order reminds us of that reciprocal responsibility to take care of those foods, that promise to take care of Indian people. And it takes us from in-stream in the floodplain to the mountains where the huckleberry are. This is why we can't separate natural resources from cultural resources. They're the same thing.
Wiggle, wiggle. Oh yeah.
Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. Oh, a little bit farther.
The biggest concern to me is that if climate change predictions are accurate, and if you see shifts in the suitability of habitat and range for entire species like salmon, or maybe even other foods like roots and berries, if those foods shift in their distribution significantly, then it's kind of like they're leaving the community behind.
My people have been here from time immemorial, doing this promise, singing for these things, our brothers, our sisters, teaching our children, and hopefully we'll be able to teach those things to our grandchildren and generations down the road.
Mimi Pama Taman Klachna out nit kwarat na milaikai Ku na naknewish na mit tamanwit Qualisim out chikuk nama Orachna na mit sinuit iniaite kunaknuitachna Klach natun out ni kwarat Ayawa nami kut chikuk
So again, these are works that have been put together over time. And so it's always really nice. Again, tribes have been adapting to natural changes in climate since time immemorial. And so the work that we do today is just the most recent iteration of a long line of adapting to climate change. And that's something to really keep in mind here when we talk about climate change issues, is that I almost feel a little bit insulted when people describe first foods as being vulnerable, because it's not first foods that are vulnerable. They express this really incredible bioplasticity and this ability to adapt to all these different conditions, but it's the things that we've put in the way that limit their ability to express that adaptability. And so this is kind of the way that we are approaching this climate adaptation planning effort. So let me see if I can get, I'm going to check in the chat to see if make sure everything is okay. If you are having difficulties hearing anything, if you don't see what I'm talking about, please throw that in the chat and we'll try and address it. So again, we're all really troubleshooting this here. I am not a big technology person, so this is a bit of a stretch for me. I think I'm doing good, but we're going to if you have any problems, please just let me know. So we're gonna get back to our PowerPoint. So those videos are really beautiful, and I'm really grateful to be able to share them with you here today. And I think if you have specific interest in them, you email me and we can send you the links to those. So today I'm really excited to be here talking with you. I'm not normally a presenter, I'm more of a facilitator, but because we're discussing kind of the way that the plan is structured, I want to share some of that with you. The draft plan was, well, part of the draft plan was emailed out to everybody who registered. And so it has chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 in that. And so that's kind of what I will be talking with you about today. But we also have on the line Ms. Mary Wister, and I'm very excited to have her be able to present to us later. And so Mary, I was wondering if maybe I can have you just jump really quickly on the line and say a few words about yourself.
Sure. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me to do this presentation. It's an honor. I really do appreciate the invitation. And yeah, I've been in the National Weather Service for about 28 years. Most of it's been in Pendleton. And so I have a lot of experience in terms of the weather and the fire weather climate, because that's usually my area of expertise. But yeah, I look forward to doing my presentation. Thanks, Colleen.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
You bet.
So getting on with it. So why do we plan? Why are we here today spending time watching this webinar and discussing with one another about climate changes? I think this past year has really done a good job of showing us that when we have things happen to us that are unanticipated, it goes really poorly. And so planning comes really in two forms. We can either react to things that are happening to us, or we can look ahead into the future and look more proactively at what we think might happen and how we might prepare for that. And any kind of good plan really does both. You can't really have one without the other. And so when we look at planning efforts, things like hazard mitigation or emergency preparedness have both of these compounds. They are able to react immediately to the needs of the community in times of natural disaster, but they're also able to kind of look ahead and say, these are the things that we expect to happen, and these are the, when we plan reactively, we often run into like shortages, like we're seeing with the pandemic. We had that weird run on toilet paper for some reason. And so if we only plan reactively, we run into shortages and we have gaps in community need that are not being filled. And so that's where that proactiveness comes in. And climate change, the climate crisis, will really alter the scope and magnitude of the hazards that we will face coming into the future. And so this is a really great opportunity to look at what is happening now. California is a really great example of what the future will bring. And so we can look to California as a way of looking at their reactive planning and what kind of gaps they're experiencing. But we can also have the benefit of having all this scientific knowledge and all of these ways that we can kind of crystal ball gaze into the future. And so this plan is really both of those together. So in the first part of the draft plan that you have, we have the goals of the adaptation plan. And the first goal of this plan is really to make sure that we are centering Indigenous knowledge and environmental justice in our climate planning. This plan is not the same as any other municipal or county or state plan because it is supposed to reflect the community that it comes from. And really, a lot of the Western perspective on planning comes from prioritization. They say, let's decide what's most important and what we have funds for and go from there. But when I was doing a lot of initial outreach about the vulnerability assessment that was done in previous years, there was a sentiment that prioritization was really not how tribal people plan, that you can't really remove one thing from another and expect it to go well, that everything is connected. And so you really have to plan. And so then the second goal of this adaptation plan is really to bring everyone together in this planning effort. up until recent years, really the Department of Natural Resources has kind of spearheaded this adaptation effort. But this plan is an attempt to really branch that adaptation effort out into other tribal departments and programs that might not feel like they are immediately related to the first foods and climate adaptation, but really we all have a role in this, and all of our voices are very important. And so this is a way of bringing together different priorities and different perspectives and really making sure that we create some win-win situations. And then the third, again, this plan is not anything new per se. It is just the most recent iteration of a long line of preparing for the future, of planning for the future. And so this is also an opportunity to really celebrate the things that the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, the Cayuse, the Walla Walla, and the Umatilla people have been doing since time immemorial, and especially in recent decades, especially with the First Foods mission and habitat restoration and all of the work that has been going on for the last few centuries, really. So you all have the draft plan, and I don't know how much you got a chance to look at it. It is kind of a lengthy document. There is more to it, I promise. And so I just wanted to really quickly talk about what is in each chapter. So the first chapter, it's important, really, language is a very important thing. And so to make sure that we are prioritizing the right things, I want the language to be very present. So there's a space in there there's a story, the written Umatilla word written story that I'm trying to get from the language program to really put into that first section. But then the first part of the first chapter is all about the tribe and kind of its governance structure and its economy and culture and the connection to the first foods. And so it really, I'm happy to add or subtract anything that you feel is inappropriate or should be in that chapter. It's a draft version, and so this is why we're here, is trying to make it, improve it and make it better. And then the second part of the first chapter is really kind of that description of why indigenous food systems are the way to go, because conventional agriculture, like a very Eurocentric, very colonizer agriculture structure, is largely responsible for climate change. Import, export, when we move things around, we burn fossil fuel. Fossil fuel-based food system is really what we experience at a global level now. And so this second part of this first chapter really takes time to explain why an indigenous food system is inherently climate resilient. And then the last part is all about CTUIR, the history of specific climate engagement, but also the way that all of the tribal governments and their programs really fit into that indigenous food system.
Oh, Colleen?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but somehow your slides aren't showing.
Oh, okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So let me try and figure out what is going on. So, oh, it helps if I share, doesn't it? So, going back. We didn't miss too much. Can you see him now, Mary?
Yes.
Okay, and still, like with the big?
Yeah, I do see that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. So, yeah, this is just the first slide from chapter 1. It's nice to just kind of talk through it too, so I don't think you missed anything. Chapter 2 is the connecting climate science and first foods. And so this chapter is all about the carbon cycle and the science behind the greenhouse effect, and really just that atmospheric components that play a role in the climate crisis, as well as it provides a little bit of an overview of that 2015 CTUIR climate change vulnerability assessment, and goes into some of the other considerations that happen or that we should take into consideration with global climate patterns. And I'm really excited to hear Mary's presentation, because it will probably do a much better job of explaining this than I will. I always get atmospheric science questions and I'm like, I'm not an atmospheric scientist. So I brought one today and I'm very excited about that. This is kind of a really quick snapshot of what the rest of our webinars will focus on. So chapter 3 is the only chapter that was left out of the draft plan that was sent to you. And that is because that is going to be the bulk of what the subsequent webinars will be about. And so this is our adaptation wheel that we have developed to kind of capture the way that all of these impacts interrelate with one another. And so the water is, of course, the first and the last of the foods and thus the most important. And so it's represented here twice. But then we also see all of these other ways that we engage with the food system, from the physical presence and health of first foods and our ability to get to them, the roads and our houses that keep us safe and allow us to access first foods and process them in a safe way. Human health and happiness. So much of this is quality of life issues. So much of this is small creeping changes that affect chronic health conditions. And so it examines both the physical impacts, but also the really emotional impacts of climate change. Energy production, we, for better or worse, are very dependent on energy in our food system. And so we both benefit and are harmed from energy and kind of the way it's produced and distributed on the landscape. And economics and community really captures that way that we interact with each other, both in that monetary capital as well as that social capital that keeps us together. And then, of course, everything is to support the sovereignty of the tribal nation, of this tribal nation, and the ability for tribal members to exercise their treaty rights. And so explicitly calling out the impacts to those, the ability to have self-determination is a really important part of this plan. And we'll do this kind of in a mapping of natural, social, and built adaptations, as well as short-term, long-term, and individual and family actions. And I plan to go through this a little bit more when we have subsequent webinars that are focused on these different categories. So chapter 4, this year looks nothing like it was supposed to, obviously. And so the first part of this chapter is really an overview of how we expected this year to go. So there were supposed to be big meetings with food and discussion groups and sticky notes and presenters, and obviously like none of that happened. And so we are having to really troubleshoot that. And so the second half of chapter 4 is going to talk about the way that we're able to do this. So we're writing that chapter here today. So thank you for being part of it. But it also includes a really great essay by our First Foods Policy intern from last year, Ermaya Butler. She wrote a really great creative summary from her time here as an intern. And so we've included that in this chapter. And I think it's a really great example of a youth perspective on all of this. And then chapter 5 is, of course, that last ability, the last opportunity for us to really celebrate CTUIR's resilience and the way that it has been building climate resilience into its culture and its governance this whole time. And so this is really where I need a lot of help. Is I know what's going on really in CNR, and I've got a couple other things on here from other departments, but there is so much more. I'm sure there is so much more to include in this chapter. And so I'm really, really hoping that you guys will all send me things that you think qualify as climate resilience for this chapter. And so with that, I hope I didn't take too much time. So I'm going to give control over to Mary. And I'm really excited to hear what Mary has for us today.
Okay. All right. Well, good morning again. And let's see, let me click on here. Let's see. All right.
Perfect.
Let's see. Okay, so you can see that okay, Colleen?
Yes, it looks great. Thank you.
Great, awesome. Just again, I've been in the National Weather Service for about 28 years, and despite a 1-year hiatus in Portland, I spent most of my career here in Pendleton. If you notice a little bit of a Southern accent, I did grow up in northern Mississippi, where it's hot, it's humid, and the terrain is flat. So when I came to Pendleton in August of '92, I fell in love with the area. I love the climate, despite those couple of weeks in the winter, we get the freezing rain. I can't stand that. But also the weather is actually very interesting here. The complex terrain makes it, to me, one of the most challenging areas to forecast in the United States. And so with my 28-year career, I still learn things over time. And so that's why I do find it fascinating. And I enjoy speaking about climate and weather. You'll notice that I have a fascination for it and a passion, and I always love speaking to people about it. So this presentation is going to be more kind of an introduction. And, if I do future webinars, I can kind of get more into details in terms of the climate, the carbon cycle, like Colleen had pointed out, and a little bit more, information that, you would like to have. So definitely let me know what is your interest in climate, and I will do my best. Not a climate expert, but I'd be happy to help you out any way I can. So what I'm going to do today is discuss the difference between climate and weather, processes that affect our climate. If you talk about climate, you have to talk also about not just the long range, but even those short range trends in climate, such as the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO for short, and even the Arctic Oscillation as well. And then last, I'm going to talk about the prediction that we're looking at for this winter. This is coming from the Climate Prediction Center. So what's the difference between weather and climate? Pretty simple, right? Weather is the here and now. It's the state of the atmosphere at this present time. So this is the area that the National Weather Service really dives into, the short-term forecasting. As you get into long-term forecasting, now you're getting into the climate. So climate is that long-range probabilities, statistics. Again, most of them deal with the climatologist, but we also do dive into climate as well. With weather, when you think about that state of the atmosphere at a specific place for a particular time, these are things that are measurable, tangible, physical. Temperature, pressure, humidity, wind, visibility, clouds, and significant weather, for example. When you talk about climate, again, it's that average weather and range over a period of time. So it could be a year, like a season, month, or even the average temperatures for a day. So I'm going to use this and kind of tie it into Pendleton. So we'll talk about the whole year. On average, in Pendleton, we get about 12.64 inches of rain per year. And as far as average snowfall, we usually total around about 15.2 inches each year. This is showing you over a 30-year period of time the climate for our precipitation across the nation. And if you notice, the areas that definitely have a huge, vast differences in terms of precipitation is Washington, Oregon, and California. The coast gets as much as 100 to 150 inches of rain each year. The further east you go into the Cascades, eastern Washington and eastern Oregon are dry climates. As I mentioned, Pendleton gets about 12.64 inches of rain per year on average. Further west, Hermiston, Tri-Cities even get less than that. The Blue Mountains, the higher elevations, can get as much as around 40 to 60 inches of rain on average each year. So seasonal, we're looking at, of course, spring, summer, fall, and winter. And that's nice to look at in terms of getting that usually about a 3-month average to get a feel for that season. And I like to look at the seasonal climate in order to determine about the potential for wildfires. We look at the season for spring. That kind of gives me a feel of how much precipitation has occurred, what the temperatures were like, to see what that vegetation has done in terms of that prediction for wildfires. So this is an example. Shows you the daily mean temperature anomalies for the summer, and for the here in the Pacific Northwest, on average, we're about near to above normal for the summer. In fact, if you look across most of the United States, was above normal for many areas, especially down in the Southwest. So monthly, we look at the average precipitation for the month, average temperatures. So for November in Pendleton, we get on average about 1.52 inches of rain for the month of November. Average high temperatures around 49 degrees, the average low temperatures around 33. And you can even break it down into dates. So this shows you just a few days ago, November 11th, what we had in terms of the observed precipitation, temperatures, how that compares to normal, and even has that record data that you can get. So this is at a point in time that I'm going to kind of get on a little bit of a soapbox when it comes to climate data. It's probably the biggest challenge that we're facing so far. Climate data gets harder and harder as the years go by. And the reason why is normally you need a good 30-year data set to have a feel for average temperatures and average precipitation. In the past, and we had people volunteered every day at the same time every day. Here are the temperatures that we had. Here's the precipitation. Here's the amount of snow. And you needed almost a continuous to get a good data set for climate. As the years go on, people are getting busier. They have other jobs. A lot of them will start off with farmers, passing it down to their families. but you know, they have things they have to do, so they weren't able to give us that daily temperatures and precipitation, and so we were kind of missing out on that. No fault of anybody, it's just the way it goes. It's, you know, nature of the beast. And this is not just for here in the Pendleton area, this is across the nation. So sometimes when we get information asking about climate for a particular location, that may be hard to do because it may have some missing data. You know, automated weather stations do take temperatures and precipitation, and we do have the ability to archive this information over time, but it will never give you the amount of snow. So it takes a person to manually measure snow. So I'm kind of off my soapbox, but yeah, climate is actually a challenge in terms of getting good data. So I'm going next to the topic of talking about processes that affect climate. And, you know, scientists and climatologists have really done an amazing job in the climate models, because the climate models have to take into account the natural processes that affect the atmosphere, the land, the oceans, the biosphere, in order to predict future climate. And they've really, really improved, but there's still some need for improvement, and it's really not everything. I mean, there's more to this story in terms of climate and climate change. And we talk about the greenhouse effect. We all know that the greenhouse gases, you know, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and water vapor are essential in terms of we need those kind of gases to absorb and radiate heat from the earth. If we didn't have those greenhouse gases, the earth would be almost inhabitable. It would be brutally cold if we didn't have them, 0 degrees on average. So they are needed, but they've increased, especially carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide over the last century. So the question is not so much the greenhouse effect, but are humans enhancing those greenhouse gases? And we are seeing, you know, without a doubt, climate change in terms of the air temperature, land temperature, ocean temperatures are increasing over time. The ocean heat content has increased, therefore the humidity has increased. And with that, you get decreasing sea ice, decreasing snow cover, decreasing glaciers. And because of the increasing temperatures, precipitation gets less and less probable. Therefore, we're seeing more wildfire activity taking place in the West. So yeah, I mean, the greenhouse effect is affecting the climate change. As I mentioned, you do also have natural climate variability. These are large scale patterns that affect the climate. We talked about El Nino and La Nina. It's the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO for short. What it is off the Pacific, along the equatorial regions, are temperatures at the sea surface increasing, decreasing, or about the same. If you start seeing a decreasing temperatures along the equatorial Pacific, then you're looking at La Nina conditions, as you see in the top left. If the temperatures are increasing along the equatorial Pacific, then you have signs of El Nino conditions. Now, the thing about the Earth is so fascinating is that the Earth is always trying to maintain balance. And if you have the oceans and the atmosphere connecting, then that gives us a feel for what the weather could be like on a global basis. And so for La Nina, on the top right, you can see that it can affect the polar jet stream and it can affect the Pacific jet stream. Same thing with El Nino. It will affect the jet streams if there is that connection between the oceans and the atmosphere, and that really gives us a feel for what the outlook is going to be as we get in towards winter. And what they do is they look along the equator and they divide it into sections, and climatologists have a Nino 3.4. That's the main area that they're looking for in terms of sea surface temperatures. So on the left-hand screen, you should see kind of a plethora of models, climate models that are used. And anytime that along the equator that is between 0.5 and minus 0.5, that's considered basically average or neutral conditions. If the sea surface temperatures anomalies are getting greater than 0.5, you're looking at signs of El Nino. If it's less than minus 0.5, signs of La Nina. And as you can see, we are in a La Nina pattern right now. And it looks like that's going to continue even as far as maybe into the spring. Some high confidence in all the models showing this below average on sea surface temperatures. Now they do start to show it increasing as you get in towards summer, but that's looking pretty far out, not really too reliable at this point. So we are in a La Nina pattern. And this also shows you along that 3.4, the trends over the last 3 months, and showing you the cooling temperatures along the equator. On the right shows you all those sections that I was telling you about, all showing the signs of a pretty strong La Nina at this point. So what does that mean for us in terms of the outlook for the winter? What happens is you have the polar jet stream that tends to ride north up along Alaska and into northern Canada, drops down the eastern side of the Rockies. And so that usually gives us some of that cool Canadian air that gives us often cooler than average temperatures for the winter. Meanwhile, you have a Pacific jet stream that's almost due west. And what that does is it gives us one system after another, keeping us wet. So La Nina, in terms of snowpack, looks good for the Pacific Northwest. And so our snowpack is looking maybe some pretty decent snow.
Uh-oh, Mary, I think we might have lost you.
Looking good, dry and warm. I'm sorry, do you have a question?
No, you just cut out for a second there, but you're back. So sorry
Oh,
about
I'm
that.
back. Okay, yeah. Well, I'm actually glad the winds are starting to decrease. That's good news.
It is.
So, okay. So what this shows you in this next screen is those sea surface temperature anomalies along that 3.4, and on average of what they've been doing the last 3 months. So starting in 2020 up to pretty much spring is that they've been between 0 to 0.5. So we actually had neutral conditions at the start of the year. But as you get in towards currently, there are showing those La Nina conditions. So what I did was I looked up to 2000 and how many years compared to what we got going on right now. So these are the years that sort of compared. Either we were in neutral conditions at the start of the year to La Nina conditions at the end of the year, or maybe even El Nino at the start of the year. So what I did using Pendleton is looking at the precipitation and snowfall during those years. So we'll start with 2005 to 2006. You mentioned, as I mentioned, the average rainfall, the average liquid precipitation for a year is 12.64. So in 2005, 2006, it was basically almost 2 inches above average in terms of liquid precipitation. But look at the snow. That entire year, we had less than 2 inches of snow at Pendleton. So definitely low on the snowfall during those years, or during that year. 2007, 2008, we were just slightly above average in terms of liquid precipitation. Oh, excuse me, that's incorrect. That's actually below average on liquid, but just by a little bit. That should be minus 0.59. But look at the snowfall. That was a heavy snowfall event during that year and almost 20 inches above average snowpack, or at least for Pendleton. 2010, 2011, definitely high on the liquid, and snow was also quite high during 2010 and 2011. And we all remember 2016 and 17. That was the year I kind of thought about moving back to Mississippi. A little too much snow for my blood. We had a heavy snow throughout the year, and also liquid precipitation was actually quite high. The one thing, though, about 2010 and 2016, though, is if you look at the start of the year, that was actually El Nino that we started off with, becoming a La Nina. So what does that mean for Pendleton? Actually, it looks like the precipitation liquid is still looking to be good, above average. Snowfall, that could be anything from looking at a lot of snow to some puny amounts of snow. But it does look like the mountains are going to have probably some pretty decent snowpack. And in fact, this next 7 days to 10 days, mountains are going to get some pretty decent snow. So keep your fingers crossed. Snow is good. So yeah, we are under a La Nina pattern. Now, this is a pattern that's not often discussed just because it's complex. It's kind of hard to explain. But also, too, there's more fluctuations. It's called the Arctic Oscillation. And the Arctic Oscillation has either one or two phases, positive or negative. In a positive phase, that means that the atmospheric pressure over the Arctic is low. And what that does is that allows the westerlies along the mid-latitudes to be strong. So again, you get those westerlies, you'll get maybe Pacific storm systems moving across. You also might have warmer than average temperatures across the United States because that Arctic air is up to the south. Those westerlies prevent that Arctic air from moving down. And the negative phase is the opposite. That means you have high pressure that is quite strong in the Arctic, and the westerlies are weak. And those westerlies are too weak to prevent that Arctic air from moving down. These are the things that often bring those strong Arctic outbreaks. You may have heard of polar vortex. That's what usually occurs in the United States. So here's another example. Left is the positive, right is the negative, and the westerlies and a positive are too strong to prevent any of that cold air coming down. In the negative, the westerlies are so weak that it allows that cold air to move south. So what are we on right now? Well, I mentioned there's a lot of fluctuations in the Arctic oscillation. So we did start off middle of the year being some positive, but we're starting to get closer towards a maybe negative. But I wouldn't put too much weight on us having any Arctic outbreaks at this point in time. But it's just something to show. I mean, if we do start to see something of a strong cold air coming down the United States, polar vortex, then that might be the fact that there's a negative Arctic oscillation. One other thing too, you notice in 2010, it was strong, negative. But I looked in this area, I didn't see anything that really stood out in terms of very cold air during that time. So yeah, it's not a one size fits all kind of situation. This I wanted to show you. This is actually really cool. I get excited about this kind of stuff. This is the westerly jet stream. It is what it is now and what it's looking at for the next 30 days. And as I mentioned, you remember in a La Nina pattern, you get like one system after another in these westerly flows, and that's exactly what's going on. It's almost a straight westerly jet stream all the way up until maybe the end of the month. Then it looks like it might be more kind of moving north. But for the most part, the next 14 days is looking to be kind of a wet pattern with some good snow in the mountains, and we may have some snow down in the lower elevations as well if we get enough cold air. So that's, like I said, good news. So what's the winter outlook looking like? This comes from the Climate Prediction Center. One of the things I want to tell you about the Climate Prediction Center is they are out in Silver Spring, Maryland. Good folks out there, climatologists, but they are covering the entire United States. So they're going to broad brush these averages. And so they don't know about inversions in the Columbia Basin and all that. They don't focus on that. They're focused on such a large scale, area. And so it is somewhat broad brushed. But what they have for November, December, and January of above normal temperatures for most of the United States. You get up in towards Washington and Oregon, it says EC, which means there's some uncertainty there. But on average, basically they're showing average temperatures. Precipitation actually shows below in the southern half of the United States, but in the northern tier, above average on precipitation for the outlook for November, December, January. This was issued October 15th, and they do issue these during the middle of the month. And today being the 13th, I think the next issuance is going to be on Monday, which is the 16th. So we'll see what they have. One thing also to show on this is, I've kind of been focusing a little bit also, not just for here, but to the south. And this is kind of heartbreaking to see that California, the Four Corners states, are not looking good in terms of getting any significant precipitation for the winter. So here's the drought outlook out through the end of January. We've been in a drought, but with those wet conditions, we are looking a little bit more promising of seeing either improving conditions or maybe some slight possibility of getting some drought removal. But I think the main thing is that we are looking at improving drought conditions. But to the south again, not looking good. So that is all I have for this presentation. I do have my email address on there, my phone number. Feel free to contact me, but I'm also standing by for any questions.
So we didn't have any specific questions necessarily, but Chief Don Sampson shared that the Climate Impacts Research Group at the University of Washington has some really specific data for this area. And so I think that that might be a really great resource for us to look at in the future, and maybe we can have another round of modeling that we could do maybe for the area, and that is some future thoughts, I think. So did anyone else have any questions that they want to throw in the chat? Otherwise, I might try and ask Mary. So for drought, is it something that when each round of drought happens that we can bounce back from in a way that's like a one-to-one, or, you know, with each subsequent round of drought, does it make you more prone to drought? This might be a weird question.
I think it is more prone to drought, and I wish I could have better news. They have gotten better at determining drought conditions than in the past. I think they were a little bit maybe optimistic, and I don't want to say they're pessimistic now, but I think they're being more maybe realistic. The fact that we are seeing climate change in terms of this warmer conditions on average, I think that's the main thing. So yeah, I would say that it's going to be really hard to remove outside of a drought. Yeah.
And I have just one more question before we kind of go into our discussion. Rain on snow events. So I think that we've seen this past winter that those rain on snow events have this particularly harmful effect on our snowpack. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to our anticipation of those events this coming winter, but also into the future.
That's an excellent question. Yeah, we saw that last February. Even the year before, we saw the same thing of just this heavy rain on top of some snow. And I would say, you know, looking at the fact that there is that heavy snowpack in the mountains, yeah, it could take a system coming through to cause that to happen again. I'm not seeing anything in the near future, but as we get in towards spring and we start to see this really heavy snow, we really do need to focus on that probability. We've already seen it 2 years in a row, and I can't rule that out. That's an excellent question, by the way. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I hope that you'll stick around for some of this discussion. I'm sure that everyone will have really wonderful questions and really wonderful contributions. And so I wanted to thank you so much for presenting, Mary. That was really great. You know, I've seen a lot of climate science presentations, and some of it is just a little bit over my head. And so I really appreciate it's a very complicated science.
It is. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you for being here. So I just want to really quickly kind of take you through the options that we have for contributions. So I'm hoping that my screen is showing. Mary, can you confirm that that's true?
Oh, no, there it is. Yes, it's there.
Okay, I think there's a little bit of a lag, so that might be something to watch out for. So if you want to say something, we have obviously the ability to chat with one another. And so we can turn our cameras on at this time if that is something that you want to do. This raise hand function here is really helpful. And so it lets me know that you want to speak. And so I want to hopefully do this in kind of an orderly manner. My least favorite part of webinars is where everybody talks over one another at the same time. And so I'm hoping that we can create a system in place where we can share in kind of an orderly fashion. So if you want to speak, please raise your hands and we'll kind of go one by one. But then there's also the option to, if you go over here to these little dots, and I don't know what everybody else's format looks like, but we have meeting notes that are available. And so if you say take notes, it takes you to this pre-plans notes section where I have areas for you to leave specific commentary on different chapters of the draft plan that was sent out to you. But then we also have these guidance questions. And so these are an opportunity for you to share some specific thoughts related to this particular webinar. And so we talked about the plan. So I'd love to know what people are hoping this plan will accomplish, or what kind of climate changes have you observed in your own experiences. And so you're welcome to type here kind of thing. Or like I said, you can type in the chat. And so there are a number of ways that we can make this happen. And so again, and I'm always available by email or leaving a voicemail and requesting a follow-up. And so I would love to see who wants to share today. So that's my thing is not working. Mary, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, my program is lagging a little bit on this end, and it wants me to restart it, which I don't think is a very good idea. So maybe if I close some things here, it will cooperate a little bit more. And if anybody just, Dawn, I know that you have thoughts that you want to share, so why don't you unmute yourself if you want and let us know kind of what you're thinking at this early date of our outreach.
Thank you, Colleen. Thank you for the presentation, Mary. That was excellent. And all the tribal citizens and staff that are here today. You know, I'm really excited that the tribe is moving forward with their climate adaptation plan, and I think it's critical timing now. You know, I've had a chance to see what's happening around the world. I was at the Paris Climate Accords with over 200 indigenous people from around the world in 2015. And they're seeing the same things in their homelands as we're seeing here, some even more drastic. You know, there are tribes in Alaska that are already being relocated. There are tribes in Louisiana who have lost thousands of acres of their homeland, the Chitimachi in Biloxi. And I've spoke to those leaders. You know, they had 2,000 acres. They're down to 200 acres. They're having to be relocated right now as we speak. The Quinault Indian Nation in Washington is moving their entire village from the mouth of the Quinault River, which is on the coast and the ocean. The storm surge and sea level rise is requiring it. It's costing them hundreds of millions of dollars. They're moving right now. And they moved their new community center up on the hill, but they've got hundreds of houses that they're going to have to move. You know, we saw this last, only in February, this huge flood. You know, we used to plan for 100-year flood events, and now we're seeing 500-year flood events happening within that 100-year time frame. The flood that we saw in February is going to be small in comparison to what we're going to see in the next 20, 30 years. You know, the wildfires, I don't want to be an alarmist, but these are the facts. We're seeing it. And I think it's important to also look at the perspective of what's happening around the globe. You know, people don't realize the magnitude of the fires that happen in the Amazon in Brazil. And you can see the effect on indigenous people. In Brazil, millions of species were killed and animals. In Australia, millions of species and animals were killed, and indigenous people were being relocated. So this is happening globally, and I think it's really a wake-up call. And I've been fortunate to study this for the past 5 years and talk to those people. And I think it's very helpful when we hear their story, when we hear from them about what the impact is, and because it's a wake-up call here at home. You know, I wish this wasn't the case. So this plan is probably the most important plan we're going to develop for the next 500 years. That's my perspective. You know, we have a huge challenge in front of us, and fortunately, we got rid of Trump. Well, almost. You know, we had to get his ass out of there, but now we have an opportunity with Biden, and we have, and I think there's some renewed hope, not just in the U.S. but around the world. So I think that we have the chance here at Umatilla to be a leader again. And I appreciate the work that you guys are doing at staff, and the board, I think, is taking this serious. But we have, I would say, 20 years. You think about our generations and how long we have had to adapt. Yeah, only in 5 or 6, 7 generations since our treaties were signed in 1855. You guys know this. We have had to adapt in 7 generations. So we are used to adapting. We have been relocated. We have gone through this before. We've been relocated from our Aboriginal lands from throughout our treaty areas. You know, where I come from at Wululapum, at Wallula or Shamna. So we know how to adapt, and that is our greatest strength. And I think the other part is that we can work together. So as far as the plan, I think it's important that we have the best tribal plan in the nation. We want to be a model. We want to think about an overarching plan to reduce greenhouse gases. That's really what the Paris Climate Accord said. Around the globe, every nation has to reduce greenhouse gases. And we know what the sources of those gases are that are warming the planet. And so we have to make our own contribution to that, but we have to have an overarching policy that says, here's what we're going to do. And that policy has to mandate every department of the tribe, every enterprise of the tribe, every organization that we interface with, including other tribal governments, other state governments, other counties, cities, somehow that they understand what our goal is. So I think that's my first message about this. And I'm happy to show what I have seen over the past 5 years traveling around the globe looking at this, as well as studying it. Every day I get probably 10 reports, scientific reports from different parts of the world, and I review those, and you can see what's happening. And oftentimes we get news articles, and to have that library of information available to folks. Some of these videos are easy to watch. It gives a good perspective of what's happening. It tells you what other tribal people are doing, and gives us some ideas of what we can do. So this is, again, an important policy. I would like to add more as we get going. I'm reviewing the vulnerability assessment that was done. I think it's a good assessment. We've got connections with other tribes, and I think that we have to be aggressive in this. We don't have any time to waste, not a day, because as we see this, it's only going to worsen, and we are the ones that are responsible. Every one of us, tribal members, tribal citizens, we are, as Clifford's saying, is that we are the guardians and we are the speakers of protecting this earth. So I encourage tribal members to take this serious, and I know you are, because you're on this call right now, and it's hard to do this on a webinar, but it might be even easier for other people if we can ask other folks to, hey, join in on this, be part of the conversation and the solutions. So I really thank you for putting this together and moving aggressively. We have to move forward aggressively with our own self-reliance, whether it be energy independence, renewable energy, that we can depend on ourselves, our own food security, to protecting both our traditional foods and and even providing our own local foods. We need to be able to have water security, protecting our water resources for our community. So we need to be able to protect our health, as we know right now. So there's a number of things that we need to address as part of this plan. But I think we're heading in the right direction, and I am happy to provide detailed comments as we get going and share what I have learned with other folks if they're interested. So I just wanted to make those opening statements, and I'm very thankful that we can come together, because this is the only way we are going to survive if we work together. Nice.
Thank you. Those were really great thoughts. And if I saw that you dropped some of the links in the chat, if you want to send those to me also in email, I can send those out with this follow-up email so that everybody has those resources. And I absolutely agree. The urgency of this is utmost, and it's in my own research, I have a background in community food systems. It's been an amazing honor to get to learn about the CTUIR food system, because it really is, it's that climate resilience. And the more that we can come back to that, the stronger we will be for the things that will come. So does anybody else have thoughts that they would like to share? Wenix, I see that you're on camera. Do you want to say something? You're still muted there.
I was just taking everything in and thinking about, I remember we get asked a lot about climate change, and at that time, you know, we're kind of directed to just kind of, you know, to stand back, because at that time the tribe hadn't taken a direction on how we're going to do that. And it's really great to see that we're at the place where we have brought you on to help us move forward with creating this plan and to see it ramping up. And I really appreciate this forum webinar, and I think it went very well to just see what we can do during a time like this in the pandemic and be able to start these conversations and to really go forward and educate our own tribal membership on, I think as tribal members and food gatherers, and we go out there, we notice the effects, but really making it so our people are able to recognize it and help us recognize that more as observers and traditional gatherers, and the effects that are happening on our native food systems and what that looks like every year, and being able to start tracking that better. And as we go out and gather foods, and as we go out and go to more areas where we're able to access foods that we haven't for quite some time, we're starting to see where there's different root species that are ready the same time as the celery, like the mummin over in the Tushy area, that it is ready and falling to seed the same time we're going out for celery, which we've seen not this last year, but the year before. And there, a couple years ago, when we went out to get bitterroot up in the Union area, when we went up there with Tara, Linda, and a few others, when we went there, the bitterroot was already going under, where Linda was out there the year before, the exact same week, and was barely coming up. And so you have all these different things that are happening, and we're noticing that our foods are, sometimes they're plentiful, sometimes they're not. The timing is different, and in different locations too. We got to remember that sometimes in a certain location, things might be ready faster or different, and depending how the wind or the sun is hitting that during that time of that calendar year. So what's going on out there with looking at El Nino and different seasons and how that's affecting those sources. And we're still really new at really gathering the information, especially related to the women's foods. And by getting out there and doing excursions and locating these food sources and using our tribal membership as informants, I think it will help us to really look at how we're going to start that plan that can be worked over several years, and to really move forward and provide education outreach to our tribal membership and beyond, and take that stance to kind of move forward. So I appreciate Donald's talks, and I know he's been going to quite a few places, and you do hear so many things happening to Indigenous people around the world, and it is here and it's not leaving, and we have to be diligent to the best of our ability. And I agree with Donald. I'm so glad that the presidential race happened the way it did, and I was nervous. I was nervous for a second. But I really look forward to the next 4 years to see what we can do under this administration, and then what we can do as a tribe in 4 years to move forward with that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that the idea of community science really strengthening is especially important for Indigenous communities, because the observations that have been going on, like you said, you and Linda and everybody that's a gatherer, a hunter, or a fisherman, really they go to the same spot year after year and they see the same change, the same thing, and they can really track these changes kind of in their marrow. And so absolutely, there's so much data out there, but the stories really also are the things that connect us. And so I'm really excited to have people share their stories and their experiences. I had another thought, but it escaped me. This is Friday morning. Does anyone else have thoughts that they would like to share? I remember this past year I was fortunate. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead and finish, Colleen.
Really quickly, I got to attend the in January the New Year at the Longhouse, and I remember Armin Menthor talking about the sacredness of snow, and that was really beautiful to me. And that was really, it got to kind of the heart of some of these climate changes, is that the snow is so important, and so that was really a beautiful sentiment. So please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, that's definitely a great point to make, is that as we go through these seasons, we cherish each one of them. They give us indicators. I think that's what Nix was getting at, is that we have certain things that indicate when these foods are ready, and it's just kind of all over the place sometimes. So we got to keep up on that. But just as from a policy perspective, we've been working for a while now, a number of years, on our first foods policy, which you're aware of. And so we've been meeting with you and other staff, but we've had that Umatilla River vision. And for those who haven't been able to read that, I think that it's been published now in Ecology and Society in 2018. And so that's a concept, I think, that bodes well for us interpreting our way of life into contemporary science. But taking that a step further in, speaking with and working for the Tribe Fisheries Program for a long time, working, under Donald in a number of for a number of years as a technician, and so trying to figure out, what is actually occurring. Even when we're at our daily jobs, it seems like for the most part, people are doing their jobs to help protect, preserve, and enhance our foods, and that's usually the basis of what we're trying to accomplish. And you think about that from all departments, and that's really the basis of what we're trying to do, is just be Indian, just live our lives the way we historically did. So the foundation of that first foods policy is to take that and see how to integrate that into each and every department. So with that goal, we're finally there this coming year. I think that's something that's going to be very pivotal as well in knowing what our goals are, not only in DNR, but around the entirety of the tribe.
Thank you. Yeah, and I am hoping that I am aware of the First Foods Policy program, First Foods Policy, and so my supervisor is the one that is really shepherding that through its process. And so this is also something that I'm hoping the Climate Adaptation Plan will do, is really serve to connect those departments. Coming from a food systems perspective, which is my education and my background, it's really easy to make those connections to the way that we interact with food and the other functions that the tribal government performs that are not just in the Department of Natural Resources. And so it is my personal opinion that when you center food, and especially first foods, in your decision making, you cannot make a wrong decision. And so this plan really serves to reflect that, and really serves to bring together all of these different departments that, again, might not feel that they are directly involved with the First Foods mission or with climate adaptation, but really have a role to play. So absolutely. Was there anyone else who wanted to? I do have
some good news. Really quick, I do have some good news, is that, with the floods that were mentioned earlier, we had a number of people who, because of bad zoning or whatever, built right in the middle of the floodplain. And so they want to get out of there. And so they've reached out to the tribe. There was about 12 of them. I think 3 have decided to change their mind or sold their property to someone else. But we've been able to secure funding through the federal government and utilizing some of our own money to purchase those homes. And so we'll be able to interact with our river vision, more notably down into these areas that have populace. We have a lot of those works going on up in the upper reaches of our drainages, but the impact is going to be probably felt even greater where there's more human impact. So being able to take those homes out, letting the river spread and utilize the floodplain is going to be a part of water retention, water temperature, passage, and for our fish and everything all the way down to the bugs and the birds. So I think that's going to be a integral part too, is how do we interface that ideal of our river vision, but integrating that into where the populace is. So that's some good news that we'll be hopefully finalizing the first quarter of next year.
That's wonderful to hear. And that's kind of what I mean by saying that the first foods really are climate resilient. And so when you allow the landscape to be how it is, it provides for itself. And so that's wonderful that people are wanting to relocate out of the floodplain, because that does allow the river to really express itself and sequester water in those shallow water aquifers to feed in later. And we'll talk more about water next Friday in our webinar. We'll have our hydrologist and some modeling efforts on that. And so we have time for really one more person to share. And so I'd love to have some closing thoughts from anyone who wants to provide them. Again, the first foods really, it's such a beautiful way of living, because it really is the foods are the plants and the animals that have existed on this landscape. And so they are inherently adapted to the climate extremes that we see historically. And so it stands to reason that they are also the best at preparing for the climate changes that we will see. Tribes and the foods have been adapting to natural climate shifts over a longer period of time, granted, but they have already survived multiple ends of the world in this area. And so they really are the most beautiful way of moving forward. So I'm going to give an opportunity for one more person to kind of share their thoughts. Otherwise, we will move towards wrapping up our webinar. Thank you, everyone, for all of the comments that you're putting in the chat. This is really great. And again, this is the first of many. And so you should expect you are automatically enrolled in the rest of the webinars that we will be having. We only have one other really planned for this, and but into December. We're hoping to move the meeting times around a little bit. I know a number of people were really interested in this, but we're not able to attend because of the time. And so we're going to try and move these around, have some evening and weekend format ones so that we can get as much participation in this as possible. I know that virtual is a pale substitute of being able to meet in person, but this is what we're doing to keep each other safe. And so we should all give ourselves a big pat on the back for putting up with the technology and the videos and the chats and everything. And so I wanted to just very much thank you for being here today. And I look forward to talking with you on future webinars. But then also, we always want the ability to maybe get something back for our efforts. And so I wanted to let you know that our raffle prize here, so it may be a little hard to see because of the light, but we have an CTUIR Visual Pro. And so these are something that the tribe has purchased with, we got a grant from Meyer Memorial Trust. to purchase around preparing for fire. So the idea of using traditional burning to really alleviate risk of wildfire, but also bringing awareness to the impacts of air quality on our bodies and the way that smoke can get into our homes sometimes during these heavy inundation events. And so we purchased these air quality monitors as part of that. And so I have one that I've been beta testing in my home. It's been really, really interesting information, not just for the smoke, but also like when I burn something on the stove, how long that really does linger around in my air. And so we're raffling this off. So your name will be entered into the raffle just for registering for this, but also the feedback that you've provided here via the chat, via the notes, by emailing me or leaving a message also gets your name a second time into that raffle. And so we'll be allowing the weekends to have people be able to email or call if they want, and we'll be pulling that raffle on Monday afternoon. So look for that, and we'll have this be a raffle prize for a couple iterations of this. So does anyone have any kind of questions that they want to ask about how this is going to work, or any, again, parting thoughts? We're almost to the end of our time, but I always want to make space for people to share.
Colleen, I do want to ask that question is, I don't know if I missed the beginning part and maybe you covered this, but really looking at the overall time frame for developing the plan, kind of the opportunity to provide both verbal and written comments, any type of review process of the plan as it's being developed, and when is there a projected completion date? Obviously, it'll always continue to be a work in progress because climate is only going to change, but at some point you'll want to have a document that is kind of at the first final end state, and then continue year after year some type of update. So any idea of what is the next step, and then how do we provide written or oral?
Absolutely. Thank you for that great question. And that is a really nice kind of closing question is this right now is some of the review that we're doing. So this year obviously has not gone as planned. So this whole year was the outreach year. This was supposed to be the year that we were going to have large meetings of like 100 people and serve food and have the ability to have small discussions with like sticky notes on charts and things. And that was going to be really this huge component of building the specific strategies in this plan. And so we obviously were not able to do that this year. And so we've kind of spent this year really troubleshooting. And being a former participant in the tribal government, you know that there are a lot of really specific ways that we do things, particularly the way that we engage with the public and the way that we are able to offer software and applications and things. So I'm really excited to have this Teams application here that we're being able to use to do this outreach. And so the plan was originally supposed to be published at the end of this year. And so I think that that will probably roll into the spring of next year, unfortunately, but that does give us a lot of opportunities to have these conversations and to really make sure that that is a big component of this as it was originally intended to be. And so I'm always open to any kind of suggestions that you might have. I've had suggestions of people saying I should put little leaflets into the meals at the senior center. So Clifford, I might come talk to you about that. And I would love to know if anyone wants to be a speaker on these webinars. I'm hoping to have a bunch of different ones that really just give many opportunities for people to share things. So is that a good answer for kind of the way we're hoping that this will go?
Yeah, thank you. What about also, will you do monthly articles in the CUJ, kind of education outreach? I mean, that's a great forum to provide, you know, at least ideas and feedback. And how can we help you and help the staff that are writing the plan? Obviously, I think if we all got 3 more people to join the next webinar and they got 3 more people and all of a sudden we have 100 people, you know, we could break this. You could hopefully eventually have a kind of a working group that can help you with outreach.
Absolutely, and I love that. Yes, the monthly in the CUJ might be a little bit more than my current capacity can allow, but I have written a number of articles in the CUJ and I've got some really interesting responses from that, not from tribal members, but from people living elsewhere. And so if you want to write an article also about the climate change perspectives in your stories, I would love that. If you want to just email me and talk with me specifically, really this is very flexible. And so there are a number of ways that people can participate, and I will work to try and make this as public as possible given our restrictions. And so we are at time, and I always want to be respectful of everybody's time. So thank you so much for being here, and I'm really excited. Next Friday, I will just share really quickly one thing. Next Friday, we have our water and climate. Oh, I closed it. It's okay. We have our water and climate webinar. And so we will have the lovely Ms. Kate Ely, is our tribal hydrologist, is going to come and talk with us about groundwater and surface water. Our GIS program researcher, Scott O'Daniel, has future flows of the Umatilla River that he has put together. And so he'll talk with us about the very hyper-specific projection that we have for our river here. And then John Barkley has been governing water on the Umatilla Indian Reservation for over 20 years. And so he will speak with us about his experiences with the Tribal Water Commission and what it means to regulate water on the reservation. And so I'm really looking forward to having everyone, you're automatically enrolled in that. And so please look for those emails. So thank you so much, and have a really wonderful weekend. So thank you.
Thanks, Colleen.
Thank you, Mary.
Colleen?
Yes.
Hey, Colleen, I don't know if Donald or any of the other general council members are still on, but you have presented, and I assume you will continue to check in with the committees and commissions. And that's always an opportunity for tribal members to engage in the actual plan as well.
Yes, thank you for that reminder and that plug. Yes, presenting the committees and commissions has always been a big part of this. And so I've made my rounds, at least an initial round, to Fish and Wildlife. I know I need to get back to you guys. Tribal Water Commission has seen this. The Economic and Community Development Committee has seen this. And so I'd love to speak to health. I'd love to speak to culture. I'd love to talk with anybody who really wants this plan. And really, yes, that is an opportunity to engage. So thank you again for your time, and I'm going to close out the webinar. Thank you. But I'm happy to continue this conversation. My email is Colleen Sanders, all one word, @ctuir.org, and my phone number is 541-429-7247. And so look again. I'll see you next Friday. Thank you guys so much.